the fashion industry, a complex industry from the sustainability perspective. On the one hand, you have a high level of consumer engagement and interest. On the other hand, a lot of challenges within circular economy, resource efficiency, waste, and of course human rights and labor conditions all around the world. My name is Erik Elvingsson Hedén, and I'm the founder and CEO of the insight agency SB Insight. We're an insight agency focusing on sustainability from a brand, communication and business development perspective. We help companies and brands in our markets understand how does sustainability affect them, their communication, their branding, and of course their business as a whole. We have three major business areas, the biggest one being Sustainable Brand Index, which is Europe's largest brand study on sustainability, something we've been doing for almost 14 years now. Apart from that, we do a lot of research and reports for companies, basically custom insights helping them make sense of the market. As a third leg in the company, we do a lot of lectures and seminars talking about how do brands communicate sustainability, how do they build a sustainable brand in the best possible way. Here we can see some examples of companies that we work in, and we work with a variety of brands and companies within many sectors, which is very interesting but also important, I would say, because this helps us be on our toes and actually really seeing what is happening within one sector, which could actually be very interesting and relevant within another sector as well. Today we perform our big study, Sustainable Brand Index, within these 8 markets, but we are active all over Europe, helping companies making sense of sustainability and understanding how they can transform from being just brands to actually becoming sustainable brands. We founded the company based on the insight that sustainability was moving from being separate from the brand and not even relevant to how people perceived your brand, to actually becoming more and more integrated and being the single most important part in this perception of your brand. We're moving towards a market with only sustainable brands. It's going to be mandatory to be a sustainable brand, otherwise you won't have a business tomorrow. So, how do we achieve effective sustainability communication today? Well, to answer that question, we have to actually break it down in different parts. So what we're going to talk about is, why should you actually do this? What's the point of building a sustainable brand? Does it make sense? We're going to, of course, talk about what is a sustainable brand, what makes up a sustainable brand, what are the parameters, so to speak. We're also going to talk about how do you choose what to talk about, and last but not least, how do we talk about it? How do we make sure that this is both interesting and effective, but also actually compliant? Let's begin with the first question. Why should you build a sustainable brand? This is a question that we have looked into a lot over the past 14 years. So we have what we call the hygiene factor. We have what we call the demanded factor. We have what we call the differentiating factor, and last but not least, the brand factor. So what are these? Well, let's start from the beginning. The hygiene factor. This is really about you need to build a sustainable brand. You need to talk about sustainability because people expect you to. And they expect you to do a certain amount of things, and that hygiene level, if you wish, is actually increasing day by day, or at least year by year. People have higher expectations today than they had yesterday. Next, we have what we call the demanded factor. As you might guess, this is very much about people demanding sustainability from your brand and saying that maybe they're willing to behave in a different way, they're willing to pay a bit extra, maybe even a price premium for sustainability. Next up, we have the differentiating factor. Again, as you might guess from the name, this is about standing out a bit and being different from your competitors. So let's say you have a brand that wants to be the sustainable alternative, or maybe own a certain topic within sustainability, being associated with something very specific. And last but not least, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, is the brand factor. This is actually something that helps build your brand, that helps increase the trust in your brand among consumers today. Let's take a closer look at two of these factors to begin with. So we have the demanded factor. People actually willing to act differently or maybe even pay a price premium for a specific sustainable product. That is tough today. That is always tough because, losing money, paying more is something that is a punishment for the brain. And of course, we're in a time where economy is tough, cost of living is high. So this kind of demanded factor, I would say, is kind of out at the moment. It's not something you can work with that much. The other one that I want to talk about as well now is the differentiating factor. So as I mentioned a bit, being a sustainable alternative or being the sustainable option in your category or your industry, that is also tough today because everyone, all the brands out there talk about sustainability. So being the sustainable alternative, the sustainable option, it's not possible anymore. And maybe you feel, okay, but let's take a certain topic. Let's own a certain sustainability topic within our category. That is also tough today because consumers expect all brands to deliver on all of these different topics and different focus areas in your industry and category. So we can actually rule out these two, the demanded factor and the differentiating factor. And we can focus more on the hygiene factor. That is still there. People expect more and more from you every day in terms of sustainability. And of course, the big one, which we're going to focus a lot on today, the brand factor. How sustainability is key in building trust and actually building some kind of likability around your brand as well. Now we talked about the 4 key reasons for building a sustainable brand. Let's dive a bit deeper and talk about how is building a sustainable brand good for your business? Because this is something you need to know, especially internally if you want to go to talk to your CFO or your CEO about this. This study showed a lot of things, but I want to highlight 2 of them. One thing is what we're looking at in this graph. If you look at investments in long-term brand building communication and more short-term sales activation, they could see that over the first 6 months, yes, it is more positive for sales to actually invest in the short-term sales activation campaigns. But after that, more than 6 months, the bit of a longer term, it is more effective for the sales and the sales uplift to actually invest in brand building communication. Very interesting. And they talk about the 60-40 rule. So you should put 60% of your budget in the long-term brand building and 40% in the more short-term sales activation. The other thing that I think is interesting is also that they could see clearly that emotional communication was also more effective when it comes to sales uplift. So why do I mention this? Why do I connect to this study performed in 2013? Well, because sustainable branding and talking about sustainability as a brand is all about long-term brand building. And it's usually also a lot about emotions, creating emotional attachment and feelings in consumers, why they should prioritize sustainability and why they should actually care about your brand, talking about sustainability and being a sustainable brand. So why do I mention this study? Well, there are many reasons, but 2 of them that I want to highlight is exactly what this graph shows. Basically that if you look at how to invest money in order to actually achieve higher sales, you can see here clearly that over the first 6 months, you will see a higher sales uplift if you do this kind of short-term sales activation campaigns. But after that, more than 6 months, which is not very long-term in my opinion, then you can actually see that investing in brand building communication will be more positive for your brand and for your sales in this case. And of course, the reasons why I want to highlight this is that sustainable branding and sustainability communication is by nature quite long-term. So that is good for us. So we can talk about sustainability and we can build a brand in the long-term perspective, a sustainable brand in the long-term perspective, and actually see that this would also probably make financial sense for the company. Another thing that I just want to mention is that they could see clearly in this study that emotional communication was more effective in terms of sales uplift. And sustainability communication should, depending on who you ask, is at least quite often about emotions rather than rationality. Here are 2 examples of companies that have understood the value of the long-term brand building communication. You have two articles here that I've taken from Marketing Week. One is about Airbnb from a few years back, where their CEO actually says that, it makes sense to invest in brand building. And the other one is from ASOS, the British retailer. Say what you want about them, but it's interesting to see that they have also realized now that maybe they should move some money from the so-called performance marketing to long-term brand building and that type of communication and marketing. I want to take an example here from another industry, the energy industry. So this is Vattenfall, which is a big Swedish energy company, but present in many other countries. Vattenfall has made it clear that they want society to be fossil-free within 1 generation. This is something they activate around constantly, and they always connect back to this fossil-free within 1 generation. Let's take a look at the numbers here for Vattenfall. This is from Sustainable Brand Index in Sweden. Around 2017, Vattenfall started investing more and more money and efforts into talking about fossil-free within 1 generation. What you can see here in this graph is you have the average score for the energy industry. So all the energy brands that we're tracking in Sweden, that's the orange dotted line. Then you have the other line, which shows the score of Vattenfall. So basically how sustainable Vattenfall is perceived to be by Swedish consumers. And as you can see, from being quite far behind the industry average, you can see that Vattenfall not only closed the gap over time here, but actually bypassed. In 2022, they bypassed the industry average, and by the 2022 and also 2023 Sustainable Brand Index, perceived as the most sustainable energy brand in Sweden. Looking at the industry, we can see that over this period of time, the industry increased by 1 percentage point only, whereas Vattenfall actually increased by 16 percentage points. So they did something right. And why am I showing you this? Well, of course, because they have managed to actually move from being seen as quite unsustainable to be seen as the most sustainable brand in their industry. But also, if you take a look at this other graph here, you could see that from a brand image perspective, meaning what is the general attitude to Vattenfall as a brand, that this has actually had a spillover effect. You can see that once the perception within, in this case, environmental responsibility started going up, that also had a positive effect on the general brand attitude to Vattenfall. And this is what I'm talking about when it comes to the long-term investment in brand building and brand building communication. Now we've talked about why to invest in building a sustainable brand. The next step is, of course, to talk about what is a sustainable brand, what makes up a sustainable brand today. Let's take a look at the key indicators and the key parameters of a sustainable brand. First of all, you have awareness. How much do people know about your sustainability work, or how little maybe? The attitude. What do people think about it? Are they positive? Are they neutral? Are they negative? Or don't they care? These two, the awareness and the attitude, I would say quite obvious things that I think you all understand. So where I want to focus today is actually on the next two, what we call the passive drivers and the active drivers behind a sustainable brand. And what we're looking at here is a graph showing actually the net score from left to right on the x-axis. You see the net score of how consumers perceive different industries and the impact of different industries. So the further to the right, the better the impact, the more positive the impact according to consumers, and the further to the left, the worse the impact, the more negative it is from a perception perspective. On the other axis, the y-axis, going from the bottom to the top here, we're looking at the average score, the perception score within sustainability for the brands within these different industries. So as you can see here, if you look at, for example, grocery stores and pharmacies, these are industries that are perceived to have a positive impact, and the brands in these industries are also positively perceived within sustainability. And this is interesting because if you look at fashion, now we have two different industries here for the Swedish market. In this case, we're looking at fashion brands and we're looking at fashion stores. And you can see that it's actually negative. The net score when it comes to the perceived impact among consumers of fashion brands and fashion stores is negative. So not that good. And of course, what I'm trying to get to here is that this is really impacting and affecting how consumers perceive the brand within these different industries. So the impact is perceived to be negative. This is pulling you down, so to speak. So for fashion brands, which we're talking about in this case, being a fashion brand is not always, but usually something that is not super positive from an industry affiliation perspective. But this, of course, affects you a lot. So what industry are we a part of? And is that a positive thing to be a part of that industry in the eyes of consumers, or a negative thing? So that is a super strong driver, passive driver for how you are perceived. And it can go your way, which is thus for many categories in food and beverages. And it can also go the other way, so to speak, and be a challenge for you. So you have to figure out, is this helping us, or is this actually an obstacle for our brand? Next up, let's have a look at two other passive drivers. First, to the left here, you can see the origin. So again, we're in the Swedish market. We have brands that are Swedish, we have brands that are Nordic, that are European, American, etc. So what you're looking at here are the average scores for these different types of brands when it comes to consumer sustainability perception. And as you can see here, being Swedish tends to be quite positive in the eyes of consumers, and will also help you in how you are perceived within sustainability. Similarly, we can see within ownership, being a cooperative brand, having a cooperative ownership, for example, a lot of dairies have this model, is super positive in the eyes of consumers, which will, as you can see here, increase the score of those types of brands. So cooperative is good. Being publicly owned in terms of, municipality or even state owned is also a very positive, passive driver for brands within sustainability. Moving from the passive drivers within sustainability perception to the active drivers within sustainability perception, we can take a look at this one. Some fashion brands in the Netherlands, actually, in the Dutch market. I've removed the brands out of respect for them in this case, but you can see here you have a handful of brands, and you can see the numbers here showing how large a share of consumers, Dutch consumers, are positive to the work that these different brands are doing within these different areas. So you have, for example, one thing which is of course huge in e-commerce and fashion, returns. How do they handle that? We have packaging, we have plastic, as you can see. So you can see, depending on the brand, they have actually achieved different levels. So these are the active drivers, what people actually think about. Of course, that has a huge impact on how do they perceive your brand in general within sustainability. And of course, the next step here is to look at, okay, how are we perceived within these different areas of sustainability, and comparing with what is the importance of these different areas. I've taken some examples here. I've removed some as well, just to make it a bit clearer for you. What we're looking at here is not only how this specific brand, again, it's unnamed out of respect for the brand, how this brand is perceived by consumers within all of these different sustainability topics, but also what we're looking at from left to right here on the x-axis is how important are these topics. So the further to the left, the less important in the eyes of consumers, and the further to the right, the more important it is. So for example, you can see that this is a brand really doing well within some topics that are also very important in the eyes of consumers, but they also have some challenges, as you can see in the orange areas here, topics that are either fairly important or even very important in the eyes of consumers, where this brand is actually perceived to do quite poorly. What you want here is to have as many dots as possible in the top right corner. Important areas according to consumers, where we're actually perceived to do well as well. Let's take a quick look at two examples of topics where this brand is actually doing quite well according to consumers, and also within topics that are important. You have packaging, renewable recyclable packaging, an important area where this brand is on the positive side, so to speak, and also clothing, etc., by sustainable materials is also an important topic where they're doing quite well from a consumer perception point of view. Now we talked about why you should actually invest in building a sustainable brand, and most recently also what are the components of a sustainable brand. Of course, now we're getting into the next stage, which is very much about how do you communicate to build your sustainable brand. And first of all, it's very important to have a look at what are the areas, the focus areas within sustainability that we need to talk about as a brand. What is expected of us? And of course, the first step to do is to see where do we have an impact, negatively or positively. Apart from that, to get to the point of what should we talk about, you have to look at, of course, what is hot in the market. What are topics that are driven by regulations, by politicians, by other things that other people, other stakeholders that are talking about sustainability topics. You have to take a look around you and see what are our competitors strong in. Are there some areas where they're actually way ahead of us? maybe that is something we should either catch up, or maybe we should try and talk about some other things as well. Of course, your own strong points internally. What are the areas where you're really excelling in sustainability? And, which I've talked about before as well, consumer priorities. What do people expect from you? What do they want to see from your brand? All of these together make out really the kind of key to deriving what are the areas your brand should focus on in communicating about sustainability. This is one of the main things that we help our clients with, to understand what to talk about. Of course, how to talk about it, but really choosing the right topic. What we do is we look at, from a brand perspective, what are your strong points, your weaknesses. Same for the competition. We look at the consumers, of course, what are preferences today and tomorrow in the consumer minds. And also what is happening in the market from a regulatory perspective, or politicians, or other important things. And how does that affect what you should focus on and what you should prioritize going forward. Now I've spent a few moments talking a lot about what to communicate about within sustainability, and that is super important, of course. But the key challenge ahead of us is really lying in the how. And let me give you an example and why this is. What we're looking at here is the attitude to environmental responsibility in the grocery store industry in Sweden. So you have the big players here. You have ICA, you have Coop, you have Lidl, and all the other big players. This development means that we have gone from a situation and a market, in this case in the grocery store industry in Sweden, where we have a big spread, we have some front runners, we have some laggards, to actually having a super tight race between all these brands. This means that the challenge today is not that much about, okay, what should we talk about? Because all these brands talk a lot about sustainability. That is the key driver of this development. From having maybe ICA and Coop being the key players here talking a lot about sustainability, to all brands in this industry talking a lot about sustainability. That's why we have this situation today. So the challenge now is, how do we actually shift our focus from what do we talk about to how do we talk about it and actually achieve effective sustainability communication? I really want to be clear about the key challenge here. Back in the days, it was more about what should we talk about? And that is still super important, absolutely. But it's not a point of differentiation these days. The point of differentiation and really the key to successful sustainability communication today is the how. How do we talk about sustainability in a way that is engaging, interesting, and also then effective? I want to answer this question, and I want to give you 3 super important components in this. I call them balance, I call them transparency, and I call them consistency. These are the 3 keys to achieve this. First of all, let's have a look at balance. Yeah, what do I mean by this? Well, by this I mean, especially in a market like today, where we're in a situation where the cost of living is high for people. People think about money or the lack of money almost every day. So what you have to do is really balance, I usually call it what's in it for me. This is good for me as a consumer, and what's in it for the world. So you can be sustainable, but it also needs to be good for me. And in this case, we're talking about, for example, financials and the private economy. So here's a great example from Nike when it comes to balance. And what I mean by balance is balancing what's in it for me as a consumer, why is this good for me, and also what's in it for the world, or why is it good for the planet or for other people, so to speak. So you have this balance, yeah? And Nike here, selling second-hand sneakers on their website, integrating this into their business model, is just a great example, quite simple example of how this is relevant for me as a consumer. I like these Nike sneakers perhaps, but also there's a lower price. Again, now we're delivering both on actually circularity, second hand, but also being able to find those sneakers that I really want perhaps, and also to a lower price than they would be if they were new. Not until now that we see brands actually embracing transparency and really choosing to be transparent, not being victims of it. So you can take, for example, McDonald's with their Nordic strategy of big enough to make a difference, rather than trying to hide the fact that they are a big multinational American brand. They actually embrace it and say, hey, we're a big player in the market. Whenever we do it, make a change, it's going to be a real change within sustainability. Let me take another example of transparency and how it can be used. This is from Haglöfs, the Swedish outdoor brand. And this is an extract from their sustainability report, but it really shows how they think about transparent sustainability communication, but it really shows how they think about sustainability communication and how to be transparent about it. So first of all, they're really giving you a substantial definition of what they're talking about. So they're talking about net zero here as an example, yeah? So they're really, stating this is what we mean, this is what we know about this is the definition. And then, since there are still discussions and ambiguity around net zero and what it means, they're also very transparent about that and the fact that this is complex, and this is also something, as sustainability usually is, that is under constant development. And then, in the end of this example, you can see that they have a quite humble but yet very firm statement saying that this is, based on what we know, we will do the best we can. And also stay on top of things as the discussions and debates mature around net zero in this case. I think this is a super example of how you should think about the how when it comes to achieving effective and credible sustainability communication. One final example, and this is also taken from the outdoor industry. This is from Icebug, small Swedish brand from the West Coast. They do outdoor gear, shoes, for example. And this is a super example of where their CEO has really challenged other brands in the industry and also is being super transparent about, this is what we think is important. This is how we have framed, this is how we have crafted our sustainability report. What do you think about it? So rather than being forced to be transparent, this is a brand and this is a company that chooses to be transparent. Last but not least of these three key components in achieving effective sustainability communication is consistency. So really sticking to your guns, so to speak. And of course we can then connect back to this study that we talked about in the beginning, the long and the short of it. And this is of course for motivating why you should stick to it and why you should invest in long-term brand building communication. But consistency is key, and especially in sustainability where you tend to have sometimes fairly complex messages. So if you just run those for a short period of time and then decide to change, risk is really that people won't have understood anything, and then you're just throwing money around you. To repeat, balance. What's in it for me as a consumer combined with what's in it for the world, for people, for the climate, etc. Transparency, really choosing to be transparent and using that as a tool in your communication as well. And again, last but not least, consistency. Stick to your guns over time. It takes a lot of time to move a brand from being a brand to being a sustainable brand, so you have to be patient. Now we reached the end of this webinar about how to achieve effective sustainability communication. We have talked about why it's important to begin with, why it makes financial sense, so to say, to actually invest in building a sustainable brand. We've talked about what is a sustainable brand, the key components. We talked about the passive drivers and the active drivers. We of course talked about what should you talk about, what are the topics that are most relevant, how do you pick them. And now in the very end, the how, which is again, to reiterate, this is really the key now, moving from the what we talk about to the how. So really being creative, being smart, and of course compliant, don't forget, that is really the key task for all of you out there in the years to come. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. I have. If you have any questions or if you want to reach out to us and talk more about what we do and what we can do for your brand, please contact me or any of my colleagues. You can go onto our website as well, which you can see now. And I hope to hear from you. And good luck in achieving effective sustainability communication. I know what you're thinking. This is hard stuff, Erik. Yes, it is. It's tough. It's complex. Lucky you. You have SB Insight. If you have any questions or if you want to know more about how we help brands like yours, reach out.